My name is Scott Thrasher. I'm a Deputy Fire Chief with the Falmouth Fire Rescue Department, and I'm the Deputy Chief in charge of operations. Beginning of March 2018, we had a significant northeast storm in Falmouth. Our event took place from the 2nd to the 4th. That was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, from the start to the conclusion of the storm. So in preparation for storms, the Falmouth Fire Rescue Department, usually a few days out, we start to get emails from the Steamship Authority, Captain Gifford, and we also will receive emails from Frank O'Glaughlin, a meteorologist. We start trying to hone in on what we can expect, and as we get more detailed information 2 days out, we'll start having staff meetings upstairs. At that point, we start trying to plan ahead as to staffing levels, and they start having conference calls on a regional level. So the Regional Emergency Preparedness Center, they'll have conference calls with the fire chief. We'll sit in with our shelter director, and we'll start looking at what we can expect on a regional level and what the utility companies and shelter coordinators and the state are planning for their response to the upcoming storm. But for this weather event, we knew we were going to have significant coastal flooding over a long period of time. We understood that it would incorporate 3 high tides, and we also knew that it would be a lot of high winds. Sustained weren't the concern, it was the gusts, but being in the lee of the Cape with a nor'easter, we were kind of wondering how that would impact us. That was our concern, so that was the unknown for us. Chief had a conference call around 10, and the weather was falling pretty much along the lines that had been forecast. And we started assessing the shore routes. The crews at that point, the shift was directed to kind of avoid the shore routes unless we had an incident specific to that location. And at that time, it was just typical calls, but we were anticipating some weather-related events later in the afternoon. At noon, we went to a level 1 storm coverage, which gets our staffing up to 14. If we're not already there, we were at 11 for the day, so we took on 3 extra firefighters. That eliminated the single-man station and gave us additional resources here at headquarters. After 12, we still had fairly routine calls until, I'd say, about 6 p.m. And about 6 p.m. is when I think we started to get the significant gusts that were forecast. And that's when we started having a very quick spike in calls for down power lines, arcing in trees, fires in trees, and alarm boxes as well, because when the power goes out in certain areas, we start generating false alarm calls to the buildings covered by fire alarm systems. With the extra staffing on now, we were up to 20 on duty, and we have the crews. We know we're in the height of the storm. The winds are building. We get down power lines, so everybody's told we're going to start to take it a little bit more cautiously on the roads, travel slower. It's hard to find the lines. It's dark now. So the crews started responding to calls. They're cautious. We're looking for limbs down, trees on wires, blocked roads. We have to pick our paths carefully because there's other areas of town are getting shut down by fallen trees. We have to start figuring out how we're going to get to our alarm that we're responding to. We have to divert many side roads. And the crews once we get on location, we need to stay a safe distance back because we don't know if we're dealing with a power line on the ground. And we have to assess the situation, and we'll notify dispatch. And that'll call in either the police to assist with blocking off the road. We'll hold the area as well, and we'll ensure that the area is safe. The priority for us when we respond to any of the power-related incidents out in the high windstorm is to make sure that the area is safe. So if there's fire, it's not impacting any structures. If it's a wire, it's cordoned off. If it's in a roadway, the road is blocked. And we make sure that it's put on the list for Eversource. And as the list builds, the responses start getting prioritized by both us and Eversource. So if we have a small arcing in a tree, we'll note it. If the area is safe, we'll move on. Wires on the ground, cordon off. We'll try to leave somebody there to supervise it. and we go to our next call. So Friday night, when we had the spike in calls related to the wind damage with the trees, people were trying to return home from events, and some were trying to get into town. And at that point, we had a lot of the major routes coming into town. The highway at Palmer Ave, blacksmith shop, Sandwich Road was shut down due to a major issue with a pole at Sandwich and Brick Hill. And there was also some limb issues on Walk-White Highway. So at that point, access in and out of the center of town was very restricted, and people were running out of alternatives because everywhere they tried to go, we were shutting another road down. So we had impacts. Sandwich Road was a major one. Jones Road, we had some major trees drop on Jones, and that's a major route for the fire departments to get to the hospital emergency room. So we were diverting around Jones Road. We did restrict travel on the shore route because at the second high tide at midnight on Friday going into Saturday, the waves had built and we had seawater going over the road, debris and stones and whatnot. So the shore route was restricted. Fortunately, we didn't have any responses on the shore route. There was also some major flooding on Saturday in Woods Hole on Gardner Road where some homes were affected. We also had a few other responses where we went to basements that were flooded, and we had to secure electricity near to make the structure safe for people. They had generators, but we had finished living spaces that still had live power in them. So we had a variety of calls. And basically the way the calls ran for us, they kind of came in three significant stages. The first one was the down power lines, where we had a lot of responses for active limb fires, arcing, power lines on the ground. Once that ceased, we started getting into the alarm responses where, due to the power outage, we started on Saturday going for alarm sounding and related to power and batteries coming down in alarm systems. Later in the afternoon, our response for sprinkler systems picked up because the sprinkler systems require air compressors to keep them charged up when they're dry. And in the afternoon, after almost 24 hours of no power, now we started going to sprinkler system activations. CO calls, medical calls were routine throughout. So over the day over those 3 days, we did 150 calls, averaging 50 a day for the 3 days. Typically, we run 80% medical. It was 50% that day. We had about 70 medical calls, and we did 80 fire responses. So a normal 3-day period, it varies, but typically the month of January and February for 2018 already, we're averaging 20 calls a day. So we were over double our call volume during the storm over those 3 days. So we didn't have any injuries specific to the storm. We did have one response for a CO investigation at a residence where a standby generator was being run in a garage, and they had opened the door and they had thought that that would be sufficient. When the CO detectors started going off in the house, they thought it was a malfunction, so they delayed calling us. An hour later when we got there, we had elevated 80 parts per million in the garage, which is very high, and when we got into the house, we had 40 parts per million, which is high as well. So, but it's the height of the readings and the duration of exposure. So we ventilated the house. Everyone said they felt fine, but we did call out an ambulance to evaluate. We have a monitor that will check carbon monoxide in the bloodstream. So we want to make sure that the people aren't impaired and we're leaving them, because the best thing we can do for them is get them to the hospital, put them on oxygen. So they were checked out. They signed a refusal. They didn't want to go. One had slightly elevated readings but was alert and oriented and answering questions appropriately, and they decided that they would stay home. So we did not transport them. And not during the storm. I'm considering the storm a Friday through Sunday event. But on a Monday or a Tuesday, we did have one injury related to limb clearing. But most most people did not heed the warnings to stay home and stay off the roads. I say Saturday, the power was in town and the roads were very congested because everybody was coming in for coffee, food, maybe a meal because they didn't have power. That kind of restricted our movement between calls when we weren't in an emergency mode, so to speak. But even with all the people coming into town, there weren't a lot of injuries related to the people traveling. I would say we're pretty fortunate. I mean, comparing to what they had to deal with on the North Shore, with the winds directly affecting the beaches and the extent of their flooding, we were fortunate on the coastal aspect of things. I will say I was surprised at the amount of damage by the winds. We've had a significant amount of northeasters here for a while now. The storms just seem to be getting more severe, and the extent of the tree damage was surprising to us. But you know, the response, I'm very proud of the fire department and how they handled the responses. The police department was there side by side with us, cordoning off the areas, making the areas safe. Everyone was extremely busy. We networked well with Eversource. Eversource had crews out as quick as they could to back us up, to either relieve us or secure the power to make it safe. And we handled it well. We opened the Emergency Operations Center. That helped to take the call volume off of the dispatch center, the Emergency Communications Center down the road. And that was just a line that allowed people to make a phone call and find out, you know, is the shelter open? What roads are open? Where is there power? Where could we go get a hot meal? Because I think, and we were lucky in the respect that the temperatures never got below freezing. So although people were homebound and without power, they could stay warm enough. We did open the shelter as a precaution. On Saturday, about 50% of Falmouth, just under 50%, was still without power. And at midday, the concern was as if we were going into another night, that we would have issues with people being at home for a long period of time without heat and food. So the shelter was opened Saturday afternoon, that some of our staff helped man. And we did have about 15 people at the shelter. It wasn't as overwhelming a response as we thought, but it was a good thing to do for those people. And the power started coming on quite quickly in the afternoon. We were surprised. By about noon, we hadn't seen a lot of progress, but by that evening, a lot of the power had started to be restored throughout the town of Falmouth. That also created a little uptick in our calls as well, because as they start energizing lines, we start finding the more obscure power lines, private lines down long driveways. We start going out for power lines again, because all of a sudden as the systems are energized, we're going back out for more fires. So it's a pretty dynamic situation, and overall, no one was injured. The guys did a fabulous job. The police department, the DPW, the tree crews were out there Friday night assisting, clearing roads. I mean, it was an all-hands-on-deck effort, and it was professional from start to finish. To prepare for a storm like this as a resident, you know, in general terms, you really need to start watching the weather a few days out, anticipate the worst, make sure, I mean, at all times you should have, you know, flashlights at the ready, some spare drinking water. If you have a generator, make sure it's in service and ready to go. If you're not here, somebody's watching your home, and adequate food supplies, so that, you know, if you are homebound and the conditions are such that you can stay at home, you're able to eat and be comfortable, whether it's a wood stove or a generator, and take care of your family there. It's better. We had a lot of dangerous situations in town, a lot of high traffic, and it's always better if you can shelter in place. And this storm was one where I feel, you know, my family was at home, they had a fire going, and they were eating sandwiches, but it kind of, it made me feel, it was relief that I didn't have to worry about them. They were ready. They knew I was getting ready and I wouldn't be home, and we don't have a generator. We're going to be working on that. So that's something that's, I'm never home, so I think a generator's in the cards now. But you know, just a little foresight. Just be prepared. You know, some canned goods and be ready for the worst. And you know, the shelter is an option, but it's basically just a lifeline. It's not a cruise. It's a lifeboat. It's not a cruise ship. So, you know, we'll open it when necessary, and it gives you a place to stay warm and maybe lay your head down. But it's not going to be full service either. We're just going to try to do our best to get everybody warmed up and available to go into town and get a bite to eat and not be cold for the night. You know, in general, we have a pretty good LEPC, Local Emergency Planning Committee. We have a great website through the fire department that links, and we put all the information on there. There's an emergency preparedness fair every fall. It's a great way to go talk to people and get all sorts of information on preparing for storms. And the way the trend has been that we're just seem to be having more and more storms on the Cape. So I think now more than ever, it would be prudent of people to take advantage of the emergency preparedness fairs that are offered and get a leg up on what might be coming next time. I mean, we got lucky on this one, and the temperatures were in our favor, but it may not be that way the next time.